Hey, welcome to Film versus Movie, the podcast where we normally debate the cinema you hate. I'm your co-host, Belton DeLaine-Facey.
And my name's Chris Shurr.
And today we're doing another segment of Cutting Room Floor where we interview filmmakers about their earlier work. So today we have our guest, Diego Ramirez.
Hi, how you guys doing?
We're doing good. Like, you're probably doing better because you're out in sunny LA.
It's actually cloudy out here right now. So,
I feel like in LA, cloudy is still a New York sunshine.
Thank you, though. Thank you.
All right. So yeah, right now you have a documentary on the festival circuit called Still Strumming. Why don't you just let us know how you got into filmmaking?
I had initially was afraid of the movie theaters, believe it or not. Like I was afraid of the big loud sounds and the darkness. It just wasn't my thing. It took some just to cut it short, I essentially got over that fear eventually. I don't want to say I'm just trying to give you the short version of that, but essentially I basically got into movies essentially by gradually going to certain movies here and there and stuff like that. And then it wasn't until I saw a movie called Avatar, James Cameron's Avatar, where I sort of said, how did they do that? And I've been on this quest to like figure out like how movies are made and so on and so forth.
Okay, so it's like you just had to see how the sausage got made, really.
Yeah, like basically like what do they shoot with? Like what was the technique that they involved? How many months did it take? Like what was the technique that they used to accomplish, said achievement?
Okay, it sounds like you were also like a fellow DVD extras kid where you just watch all the behind the scenes stuff.
I was not that at all. In fact, I actually didn't like DVDs growing up at the time. I always got them scratched up. I always ended up putting like just like dirt on them or whatever the heck not. And so I was never a fan of DVDs, as a kid.
All right, and so your first short that you shared with us is called "The Blue Pendant." What do you want people to know about this short? What it's about?
I'm sorry. No, I'm just kidding. well, that's not funny. I mean, the work speaks for itself. No, it's kind of hard for me to really speak out about the Blue Pendant without sharing its sort of faults, if that makes any sense. The period of when I made Still Strumming and Blue Pendant was this period of naivete. It was this period of like essentially going for broke, if that makes any sense. Like it was like all for nothing. Like let's go for it. Let's just throw out all the stuff that I knew in filmmaking. And then I realized when I made Blue Pendant, I didn't know much. And so the Blue Pendant, I will say though, helped influence Still Strumming in terms of its story. That's all I'll say. So I do appreciate the movie now, but at the time it was very sort of how to say this I guess you could say tedious, if that makes any sense, or at least very ugly in terms of how it got made in the first place. So
Well, what was the process of how it got made?
I had recently made a student short called Light Years. It was just like test footage and stuff like that. And I had, and a lot of students liked it at the time. And I really wanted to show myself as a filmmaker at the time, or at least like show that I had ideas. I mean, that was the idea. So, your project's in trouble when you base it on ego, And so, so I compiled up this script because I believe you. By the way, I believe you can make this is a side tangent. I truly believe you can make a film about anything. You can make a film about that chair, about that chair that you're sitting on right now. And so basically, I remember this pendant that I had in mind, that I had this concept in my head for years, and I said, well, let's make a movie about that. And so basically, I compiled this story up, simplified and stuff like that, and I basically hired a bunch of people that loved that short film, and I asked them if you would like to help me on this and stuff like that. And so that's kind of how that concept came to be. And essentially, I essentially hired people that loved that movie. I sort of had used that love that they had for that movie, and used it for for that for this particular production at the time. So that's basically where I got cut off at.
Okay, okay. So yeah, I do find that interesting because it seems like most people when they start making shorts, it's like they're trying to really make a feature length movie and condense it because that's all they watch. But watching the Blue Pen, it does feel like you did a really good job making a contained short film. We got a story from start to end. So I was just wondering, writing wise, how did you watch other shorts for inspiration, or did you just have the idea of just start really simple?
I sort of started something very simple. Like I knew, like I started out with the locations that I had at the time, and just sort of compiled what the movie was about and stuff like that. And um, in term, yeah, but actually, to kind of go off your point, actually, I think it's actually very difficult to make shorts than it is to actually make feature films, in my personal opinion. I just think that a lot of the times, it's really hard to compile a story that you have sort of conceiving in your head and condense it into like 15 or 10 minutes. It's just like I can't see how, and that's just my personal opinion. Like obviously, like how that plays out is another factor. So um but yeah, I'm sorry, I got off tangent. What was the question?
I guess just writing wise, how you explain how you came up with the idea. What I guess what was the process of writing the short?
Yeah, yeah, like I said, like it was just based off this one particular object, and that was where the idea came from. That was it. Um I had oh, can you guys still hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, all right. I I had always wanted to do something in urban fantasy, or this genre urban fantasy, for a very long time. That was kind of what I wanted to brand myself as a filmmaker. Because when you're a filmmaker, you have to know how to brand yourself, you know, and you can't just go to, oh, I'm going to go this genre, oh, I'm going to go this genre, oh, I'm going to go this. It just doesn't work like that. It's just part of the film business. You have to brand yourself of what you're known for. Many filmmakers were known for what they were known for, horror films and stuff like that, and for comedies and dramas. Like, you have to brand yourself in that way, and you have to choose what you want. And I wanted to go into this fantasy route. After it was done, I felt like I had took a big spit on the genre that I really wanted to do, you know, and I said, that is it. I'm going back to the drawing board. I'm going to take 5 months off from filmmaking, and I'm going to actually learn about what I should have learned back in film school, because I didn't learn what I have learned now is not what I had learned in film school. So so it took 5 months, like 3 years of learning about film. It only took about 5 months for me to actually learn what I needed to do in order to advance as a filmmaker. So
Yeah, and
that,
for
and
the listeners, I do think it's worth knowing that the Blue Tenant, I believe, has no actual dialogue. It's entirely visual, which for a very early filmmaker is difficult to pull off. So I'm wondering, was that a conscious decision, or is that just how it ended up flowing?
it was definitely a conscious decision. It was definitely a style that I had sort of conceived. Like I already had the music style already in mind. I already knew what kind of movie it was going to be. This is a visual format. You know, like you've heard the old saying, "Show don't tell," right?
Mhm.
But here's the thing. Alfred Hitchcock once said that sound ruined movies. That's what his sort of, because he came from the silent era format, and so and is he wrong? Kind of. Is he right? Absolutely, because it led to this is his words, not mine. Only because he felt that it led to a lot of other movies trying to use dialogue as a crutch. You know, you have to learn how to speak out your story through visuals. you can't just rely on dialogue, all the time, because it just makes the audience feel bored in some sense, and so but yeah, it was a conscious decision for no dialogue at all.
Yeah, and so then I guess with that, mentioned that like this film presented sort of a learning curve. What's some of the biggest lessons you learned making that film?
Shoot. I had like a notepad of like a bunch of stuff that I learned from Blue Pendant, but I think one of them was learning to put story first, if that makes any sense. I think there was a lot that I learned. Well, actually, and now that I think about it now, I think the biggest thing that I had learned from Blue Pendant was learning to be confident in your own vision. When I was working on Blue Pendant, I remember not being confident in my own vision at the time. I was very sort of not confident about the shots I wanted, and it led to a lot of the crew just frustrated with me. In fact, the biggest disaster of that movie, like regardless of if regardless if my crew doesn't believe me, it was just myself. It was just the fact that I had let everyone down at the time, and I was not confident about, well, what if we did this and this? And my DP at the time was just very frustrated with me. He was so frustrated that he actually demoted himself to like just camera assistant at that time, you know? And so it was just a complete disaster at the time, because I had sort of did not make it clear of what I wanted my vision to be. I saw it in my head, I saw it during post, but I did not speak it out through production. I was just too much of a weakling at the time. And so so that was sort of the vision I learned was you have to stay true to your idea. And I had sort of learned that from that particular short that I had made. So yeah, I guess that's the biggest lesson that I had learned.
Okay, so with that, because like I as well as like previous guests on here also expressed like difficulties communicating at first with crew and cast. So, is there anything
Mhm.
you found that helped you improve communicating your ideas and just sticking to, as you said, your vision?
Just keep it simple for your this is just my piece of advice of just my little little penny I guess my little sort of advice is just be communicate just be simple with what you want. you know don't be afraid to speak out no as well. Like if you don't like that idea, don't be afraid to say no. And but yeah, like I said, you have to stay true to your idea, or else you're going to end up confusing your crew and your cast and all of that. So you have to be very precise with what you want.
All right, and so like onto and crew. How did you find all the people you worked with? Was it just people you went to film school with?
Yeah, yeah. Basically, like I had mentioned, it just came from people that I knew that liked that particular short that I had made. That was just like just test shots of just streets, and stuff like that. And that's just kind of where it sort of came to be.
I guess like on set, were there any like really funny or memorable memories you have?
From Blue Pendant.
Yeah.
Good question. No, I don't think so. At least not that I can recall. Um, Something comes up, I'll let you know. But you know, yeah, no, I don't believe there was any funny moments on that particular production. We were like, despite my indecisiveness, that production was just very quick and fast at the time. So.
All right. Well, one thing I'm curious about, because there's a scene in there where it's essentially a coordinated fight scene where one person is well, at the very least, the actors are one actor is not physically in the room with the other two actors involved. What was the process like planning and shooting that?
My fight coordinator had coordinated that entirely on his own, and I had sort of came up with the idea during writing at the time. um and you know, if and I think that's the biggest problem I had with that particular sequence was I didn't pre-visualize it at the time. You know, I had did some shots but not many. Like I could have easily had pre-visualized that of what that shot was going to look like, or at least what that sequence was going to look like, but I didn't do that at the time. If I can go back and, well, I wouldn't go back, but I essentially, if I got to do another action picture, I would definitely like pre-visualize it, you know, in terms of how the energy was going to be. I learned a lot more of action scenes actually than after Blue Pendant than I did back in than when I was making Blue Pendant at the time. So my fight coordinator actually edited that entire fight sequence on his own. So
Okay. So was it like on set the actors were just like doing essentially an array of moves, and then and then like in the editing room you're like, all right, this is gonna make sense eventually.
oh no, 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 not at all. We didn't know how it was structured at the time. But in terms of like how it was going to be edited, that was all my fight coordinator's job at the time. He knew where it was going to be and stuff like that. And he knew where the shots were going to be taking place and stuff like that. But if I could do it all over again, I would have like a shot here, like maybe a reaction shot here. You know, make the movement just a little bit faster at the time. You know, because the fight coordination of Blue Pendant is boom, 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 and I'm like, oh my gosh. And so, but if I could do it again, I would probably make sort of I guess the rhythm of the fight just go like boom, 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 boom. But we didn't do none of that. I hope this is making sense at the time. You know, you have to sort of like a fight scene is like a dance. So so basically my actors were dancing, but not fast enough to be sort of heart I guess you could say thrilling at the time. So
Yeah, I know what you mean, because I mainly do comedies, and it's something similar with that, where it's like on set, you hear all the actors going, and it's like, okay, this is a great pace, but then you put it on screen, and it just feels much slower, and that's I feel like that's something you only realize like once you've been on set and then see the final product. So I know.
I'll conclude it with this: is that I think the movie is I think the movie I think the short stands up perfectly fine on its own. I think it's got a lot of great ideas. There's a lot of great cinematography involved. At least that's how I look at it from a viewer's perspective at the time, and so there's a potential there of what I had done. So I just want to go off the fact that I think the movie stands perfectly fine on its own. You know, despite what the chaos was at the time.
Oh yeah, it's a great short, but I know it's a common thing with creatives to just be like, oh, this could have been that much better.
Well, you know, even so, I actually I'm not the guy that's actually thinking about I actually don't regret, you know, making it at the time. Actually, when I'm done with a project, I actually don't regret sitting there being like, oh, I could have done this better. No, I am satisfied with how the project comes about at the end because I'm just like, I'm ready to sort of move on to the next thing, if that makes any sense, you know? Some filmmakers tend to get carried away with that love, but me, I personally don't. I personally like to move on to the next thing, you know.
Everything's satisfying so long as you're exhausted, kind of a situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. And speaking of the next thing, your documentary is still strumming. Would you like to tell people what that's about?
Yes, it is a documentary about a young guitarist who contemplates his first 3 months of being diagnosed with a rare blood cancer and how that sort of affects himself and the family around him and the people that just knew him just in general. So
All right. And so with documentary filmmaking, did you know before this that you wanted to do documentary filmmaking, or did you and kind of meet the subject and decide, oh, I want to make a film about your journey?
I I had knew Edgar, or at least the main subject, Edgar. I had knew him for a very long. I knew, no, I knew him for a very long time, and we were sort of bouncing ideas for a very long time of what we were going to do. We thought about doing like this or this or this, and a lot of them I was kind of like, I don't know, not maybe not. Like it was that kind of reaction, you know. Edgar was a very creative writer. He was a very creative writer at the time. He came up with a lot of ideas for movies and stuff like that. And but when he was diagnosed with his blood cancer, it was the way he sort of talked about it. It was just so like engaging and just like very emotional at the time. And, I remember one of my film classes, they asked us to pitch documentaries. And I thought about, and I sort of typed this pitch up of Edgar's documentary, and the whole room went silent. It was just like, they were just like, like everyone pitched about this and this, something that was just very basic. Mine was very like, was just so impactful for the time, and or at least I'm sorry, it was just it made everyone essentially go silent. That's what I'm trying to say. And
Just one of those
eh,
things where it's like, this isn't a competition, but I kind of won.
well, this isn't no, but well, it's kind of more like just from the reaction, I just felt like I can't make this for the class, but I'm going to make this movie because I just liked the way that everyone sort of reacted to it at the time. And I wanted to sort of figure out a way to sort of get the movie made. So that's kind of where the idea came from.
So you saw that it had some weight behind it. You could see like the people's reaction in live.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I just thought it would be a very tender and very sensitive story, just how I would approach it.
And so the process of actually shooting that, because I know like Edgar was going through a tough time, him and his whole family. So, so how did you approach them with actually say scheduling interviews or just shooting Edgar playing his guitar and singing?
Yeah, yeah. The it was originally shot for 2 days, or no, I think it was like 3 days. I think of just shooting like stuff with him, just a day in the life of his life at the time, and then shooting his interview, and then shooting him, recording music, and then I recorded his parents. Like I think it was like after the pandemic. Like it was like I was shooting like what his parents were doing at the time, and then I shot his doctor. All these shots sort of came in periodically, if you will. Like I sort of was sort of finding the movie as I went along, which is such an unorthodox thing to do. But I basically found the movie through the editing room, essentially.
Yeah, I've heard that's a tough thing about documentaries is that a lot of times you are shooting without knowing the full story, essentially.
I didn't know the story, but it changed over time, especially on this project too. So because still strumming came from, like I said, that time when I was making the Blue Pendant. So it came from a period of naivete. So a lot of which, so I would say I sort of went gung ho, like I just sort of jumped into it without knowing sort of how to sort of approach it at the time. It wasn't until after Blue Pennant where I knew where to take it afterwards. So
Okay, so I guess just for clarification, were you shooting this while you were still working on Blue Pendant, or is it completely afterwards?
I was shooting it while during oh I was shooting it during Blue Pennant actually. Like I think it was Nelson's interview that I did like after like I'm sorry, during the time I was shooting, or at least I was prepping to do Blue Pendant at the time. So yeah, that's but then after that I did the other two interviews like after Blue Pendant.
Was there any difficulties in terms of like scheduling or just feeling overwhelmed at all working on both projects at once?
Um Well, for both projects, no. But the one difficult challenge was actually getting to add for Edgar to do another interview with me at the time. His cancer was coming down on was coming down on him like to the wire, essentially, if metaphorically speaking. And it was really hard to get another interview with him. And I sort of had to make do with what he gave me. I actually think the movie stands up because of this, because if I had interviewed him um, during his time when he was like bedridden, I don't think I would have had the same sort of effect on the. I think Edgar would have liked to have seen himself just as the way you saw him now, instead of what he looked like in the epilogue of the movie. And if I had shot him in that epilogue stage of his life, I just don't think it would have had the same effect. So that's sort of how I feel about the movie. And so that was the only challenge that I faced, was just getting another interview with Edgar. But looking back on it now, I think it actually made the movie better in a sense. Excuse me, I don't want to say that with a question mark, but it made it better in a sense.
Well, I think it kind of does a good job of framing cancer in a sense, in the way that in the beginning it's almost about the fight. You introduce Edgar, and then it's about him fighting cancer, and they're going through all the options, and it almost seems like it's about to resolve, and then there's that gap, and you get to the epilogue, and it goes downhill so quickly that I don't. It's almost like the documentary was about the fight, and I feel like that's a very good way to frame cancer.
I mean, the movie's about death. I mean, the movie was about a young man reflecting upon death. That was sort of the main thing I had knew going into it. Like that was the main thing I had, and that theme still remains intact, regardless if it changed over time. And I feel like the epilogue makes it very clear that death is still death. You know, we can't exactly run from it. And so, and I feel like that was one thing that, that was one thing I knew about this movie, was that it was about a young man reflected upon death, and death is ultimately the winner, regardless of how you see it. So that's sort of, there's no other way to sort of look at it, if that makes any sense. We can fight it, but ultimately, we still have to pay our dues, if that makes sense, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So I guess going along with that, is there anything you felt you learned like personally as a life lesson, talking with and following Edgar throughout the process?
I think it's interesting because Edgar was probably my first real film school at the time. He knew so much about movies. He was very analytical about movies at the time. And, he was a big fan of, are you guys a fan of YMS? Like Your Movie Sucks?
No.
I think I've
Well,
heard of it.
he was he was a fan of this YouTuber named Your Movie Sucks. And one of the things he picked up on from that YouTuber was presentation, style and stuff like that. And so Edgar taught me about that, and that was one of the things I had learned from him. But most importantly, I think, and this refers to your question, I learned about empathy. I learned about how to frame people as well as characters um, in certain like heavy moments, if that makes any sense. You know, if you did like an emotional scene, you had like a camera here, a camera here, a camera there, it just comes off extremely like over exaggerated and over the top. But if you let a camera sit, just like in a close up, or however, and don't cut away from them, or just keep that one shot on them as they have this big emotional moment. It can place like a lot of discomfort. It can place a lot of emotional like carry through the audience. That's sort of how I felt. So like I could have easily done like a zoom in as certain characters were crying or something like that, but I wanted to just but I said no, hold still on them, don't move, because when you're human, you can't just sit there and just like start walking. No, you're gonna have a conversation with these people, and you're actually gonna sit there and just like listen to them. That's sort of how I feel about emotional scenes, but that's just sort of my opinion.
Yeah, and then also one thing I was wondering while watching it movie. So like, oftentimes documentaries have to shoot a lot of B roll for visuals and fill space. So you shot that, but you also added some short animations in there. What was the thought process behind adding in the animations? Because
Edgar
they did make like those moments feel a bit more fun and lighthearted.
Edgar was a huge fan of animation, and he never really got to see any of his scripts be like produced into actually something visually. And I wanted to kind of honor that, if you will, because when he shared that moment with me, and I said, I'm going to do. I had this idea of just sort of showing one of his scripts just come to light in some way. And so it gives you a taste of what his writing was like. It was very wild and very crazy and stuff like that. And and that was sort of what I had in mind. I just wanted to show it faithfully as best as I possibly could, So I think no, sorry, excuse me. No, that's it.
And so with the animations, did you make that yourself or
It was by a guy named Henry Reynolds. I had worked with him before.
okay, so so like I know you mentioned well you just said this was a way to further honor Edgar. I'm curious, were his scripts detailing what they would say, or did he talk to the animator at all, or was it more of a surprise for him?
No, what I did was I collaborated with the animator at the time. I basically gave him my ideas of what kind of animation style I wanted for that animation sequence. I experimented with actually casting his real friends that was based on. I did that, but it didn't sound right. It sounded kind of awkward. So I thought it was funnier just coming from Edgar's words. So I basically used his friend's likeness at the time, and I basically like just added the music I basically added the music from the composer at the time and stuff like that, and I just sort of added that to that particular moment. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does, and yeah, that does make sense using Edgar's voice, because watching it, it does feel like a certain energy that couldn't come from people trying to recreate it. And
Mhm.
it did feel like one of those moments, like how sometimes directors will just cast non actors because they're like, we want real emotion. That's really what it felt like. And
Mhm.
it
Yeah.
really did feel like you're just hanging out in the room with him.
Mhm. No, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Mm, yeah. So like as we mentioned, like documentaries often have a long like time editing, and that's where the story usually comes together. Was when you got to the editing room, was there a step one, or did you kind of just look at all the footage and try to put the puzzle together?
I basically put the puzzle together. It was the latter, yeah, essentially. It was a lot of it. Like originally, how I wanted to edit, I was originally just going to follow the day in the life of his life, after his cancer at the time, and then talk about his cancer at the time. I thought it was originally going to be a short film and nothing more. But then I came to the edit room. I got 2.5 hour cut. I got a 2.5 hour cut at the film
Oh,
at the time.
damn.
So I had realized that this was not and then I just came to the realization, oh shoot, I had just made my first feature film at 26 years old. Holy crap. And so I knew it was not going to be a short. It was going to be a feature. And I was like, okay, this is my first feature. Amazing. Great.
Don't you hate when you just accidentally make a feature?
It's yes, that's crazy, right? So, I didn't want this to be my first film. No, I'm kidding, but no, it was that's pretty much how it was in the editing room, and then gradually I sort of picked it apart and went back and re-edit stuff and structure it out, and that's kind of how it sort of came to be. It just it shaped, it was recut, it was rechanged. That's kind of the abridged version of that. So
All right. So was it the type of film where like did you show it to people before you officially premiered it, get feedback, and then go back to the editing room, or
I gave it to my producer at the time, and he would give me his notes, but I just knew it wasn't working. And like I mentioned, and I will say this: this is the reason why I'm very grateful for the Blue Pendant, was because it led me to sort of reshape my thinking of filmmaking at the time and storytelling. I had basically did all my questions of research of what it means to actually tell a story. I came back and applied it all to Still Strumming, and that was sort of how I wanted to improve as a filmmaker. And you still improve as an artist and as a filmmaker as you continue. But if I didn't learn how to actually tell a story, Still Strumming was never going to get off the ground. You know, and so I had to basically approach this with no ego, no with some sense of self awareness, you know. And so the reason I bring this up is because after Blue Pendant, I basically used what I had learned from Blue Pendant and applied it to Still Strumming. And I basically told my producer, who's also my co-writer for a lot of my scripts that I write, he came to me and sort of said, okay, I see now the basic problem with this movie. And he said to me was, what's this movie about? And I sat there being like, oh shoot. Oh, but like, essentially we had structured it out, like actually legitimately structured it out, card by card, and actually went about, because I had shot like, I think like 8 hours worth of footage. And so I just basically aligned all that up, and basically like structured what this movie really was about and just put the main focus on that. So.
all right. So I guess like because we're coming to the end of our time, is if you had to give some advice to any beginning or potential filmmakers, what advice would you give them?
Plan. That's my suggestion. If you don't plan out as a filmmaker, and take what was achievable from your favorite films that you're trying to sort of express your love to for your particular short or whatnot, you're never going to achieve sort of the best film that you can possibly make. What is the best way you can make the best film that you can make? And I think the best way to do that is just plan, storyboard, pre-visualize, find ways to be as detail oriented as possible. Again, the best you could do is just try to sort of plan out all your shots, especially if it's visually effects heavy or, action oriented or something to that extent. Like you just plan. That's just sort of my advice.
All right. And where can people see Still Strumming?
You can find it on Tubi. I think you could also find it on Stash on YouTube, free documentaries and stuff like that. So,
All right. Do you have any projects lined up next that you're excited to work on?
I'm making a road movie, set in 2003. So,
Oh, a period piece. Isn't it? It's been like 20
it's
years. It's officially a period piece.
Yeah.
I guess.
Once you have to get the
So-
costume department in there, that's period piece
Yeah,
stuff.
it's like once if you have a car, you need to find specific cars. That's a period piece.
Yeah, yeah. But I'm making a low budget short. I'm not short. A low budget feature film, a road film set in 2003. So.
Nice. All right. And where can people follow you?
I think people can find me on Instagram. I believe I have a lot of my photography work that I usually do on the side as kind of like a hobby. Whenever there's just certain shots in my head that I don't see in a movie, but I just see like individually, like just telling a story. And so, yeah, that's sort of you can find me on there, I suppose.
All right. Nice. Well, so we're coming to the end of our time. Diego, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Man, if I could say one last thing, I'm planning on releasing Blue Pendant on streaming services. So,
Ooh.
despite that's the reason why it was unlisted to you guys, was because I had plans to release it on streaming sites, because despite the tumultuous, I don't know if that's the right word, essentially gratuitous production, I still believe that the movie does have legs. I do believe that people still can appreciate the movie regardless of how it did come out in the final product. So that's all I wanted to mention. So
nice. Well, everyone will be looking forward to that.
Yeah. All right.
Anyway,
well,
thank you.
Thank you again for coming on.
Sorry about the technical difficulties at the beginning. You're a trooper.
Thanks, guys. You guys are awesome.
Yeah. And so this has been another episode of Film versus Movie. Thank you all for listening.